Let's try another experiment using my old phone, and I couldn't get it right in the old place, so I'm going to try standing and propping the phone up on a bookshelf here. And I think I still don't quite like it, though I can't quite put my finger on what about this format I don't like. Anyway, let's talk about Descartes. This is the Discourse on Method. We're using the Hackett edition, and we may wrap up at last part 5 of the Discourse in this video. So the Discourse on Method, part 5, describes Descartes' metaphysics. Now let's use a couple of terms. Dualism could mean different things in different contexts, but in this context, as a theory in metaphysics, dualism means the theory that there's more than one kind of thing. Actually, I guess we better just say exactly two things. Dualism means the theory that there's two kinds of things that exist. Usually dualism refers to the idea of physical and non-physical reality. Now, there is such a thing as dualism in this sense of the term that describes physical reality and non-physical reality and say they connect a lot. And maybe it goes into detail on what non-physical things are, saying there are souls, and these souls give life to the body. And even plants have souls. And a plant is alive because it has a soul that organizes the matter of the plant into a living being, an organized, unified living organism, and takes in nutrients and makes the thing grow. And then there are animal souls that do all that, but also have the power of movement, and some of those animal souls also have the power of perception, and some of them also have the power of memory. And then there's the human soul, which does all of this stuff, plus the ability to reason. And there's other non-physical things that exist, things like universals that Aristotle talked about, which Plato also talked about, although Plato called them the forms, and he has his own special theory on universals, and never mind what universals even are. And Pythagoras thinks numbers exist, etc., etc., etc. So you can give a whole inventory of non-physical reality. You can give a whole geography of non-physical place, so to speak. You can give an account of what exists in the non-physical world, and you can talk about how it connects to the physical world. And this is the old way of doing dualism. This is the pre-modern metaphysics. This is, to some large extent, Plato. This is very much Aristotle. This is Augustine. This is Aquinas and stuff like that. This is the old philosophy that's been taught in official Catholic philosophy and theology for a very, very long time in Descartes' day. And Descartes doesn't want to get in trouble with the officials who still hold to this teaching, and that's why Descartes is being careful. So what Descartes is doing is suggesting a different kind of dualism. Maybe another word that would fit it perhaps even better is dichotomism. In fact, sometimes I find the word dualism in this age, where Descartes, frankly, has taught us to think in certain ways and made it difficult for us to think in the old ways. In these days, I think maybe the word dualism should be abandoned altogether, and we should just use the word dichotomism to describe Descartes. Or sometimes I think we should just rethink what dualism means and say that it certainly doesn't mean what Descartes thinks. Anyway, Descartes' dualism is dichotomism. It's a more simplified account of non-physical reality. There's just mind is the only kind of non-physical reality, and all it does is think. And Descartes' dualism is a dichotomism because, well, in a nutshell, Descartes thinks mind exists, and it thinks, and that's all it does. And matter exists, and it occupies space and obeys some laws of physics, and that's all matter does. And that's all that exists. Well, not counting God. Other than God, all that exists is mind and matter. Mind that thinks and does not occupy space, and matter that occupies space and obeys the laws of physics and does not think. And Descartes' dualism is a dichotomism because what do those things have to do with each other? Basically nothing at all. Mind doesn't need to be in a space, much less to occupy space, in order to think, and mind doesn't obey the laws of physics. It's not a physical thing at all. There's no connection at all between mind and matter. That which occupies space and doesn't think has nothing to do with that which thinks and does not occupy space. So Descartes' dualism is a dichotomism. What he's doing in part 5 is presenting this dualism, but he does it in this clever, shady way. I won't say quite a dishonest way, but oh, it is so sneaky. Descartes doesn't want to get in trouble with the authorities, and he saw how Galileo had recently gotten in trouble with the authorities. So Descartes, in presenting his dualism, uses this clever rhetorical technique of saying, I'm not saying this is how the world actually is. Instead, I'm just saying this is how the world could be. I did the work to show how this is a way a world could be made by God. A world of mind and matter, full stop. And matter and mind never really connect, except that mysterious connection between the human mind and the human body. Okay, so Descartes says, I wrote a book on the world, and the book was called The World. And the book was not actually about our world, it was about a possible world where this new dualistic theory reigns supreme, and there's only mind and matter. And they don't connect, except that mysterious connection between the human mind and the human body. And I'm not saying this is how the world we live in actually is, not this world. This is the way the world could have been, says Descartes. And obviously he's talking about how he thinks the world actually is. He just doesn't say that he's officially saying it. He's thinking it. You can tell he's thinking it, but he doesn't say that he's saying it. So it's complicated, it's subtle, but the metaphysics is pretty straightforward. Anyway, enough of this introduction. Let's get to the metaphysics. And with all this introduction, maybe I can do it somewhat briefly. Page 26 in the Hackett edition here. For on examining the functions that could, as a consequence, be in this body, I found there precisely all those things that can be in us without our thinking about them, and hence without our souls contributing to them. That is to say, that part distinct from the body, of which it has been said previously that its nature is only to think. And these are all the same features in which one can say that animals lacking reason resemble us. But I could not on that account find there any of those functions which, being dependent on thought, are the only ones that belong to us as men, although I did find them all later on, once I had supposed that God created a rational soul and joined it to this body in a particular manner that I described. And let me paraphrase what he says here. Again, he's describing the theory he says he described in his book, The World. Here, if you want to know, and if the camera makes it clear, here is a footnote on page 23 of the Hackett edition saying where you can go and find this book, The World by Descartes, where Descartes described all this metaphysics metaphysics and physics in more detail, in which he now says, I'm not publishing this. I'm afraid I may get something wrong. I don't want to offend the church authorities whom I revere and totally trust. But I'll describe the in general outline, the metaphysics that I described in this book, which again I'm not saying is true of our world, but only of a possible world, which I suppose is technically all he's saying, but you can tell he's certainly thinking this is the better theory in metaphysics. This is the correct theory of our world. Okay, so what theory has he said he's describing here? Well, it's the theory that the body is just matter. It's just stuff that occupies space and obeys some laws of physics and does everything you can find the body doing in this world, but without the help of a soul, and doesn't think. In other words, studying matter as matter, which means, in Descartes' philosophy, studying matter as that which occupies space and obeys the laws of physics and doesn't think, Descartes says he could make a complete description of everything in this world, up to and including the human body and all aspects of human life, except those that involve conscious thought. Those that involve conscious thought need the soul. In other words, matter, obeying the laws of physics, and there's a fancy word for this, mechanism. Mechanism means matter obeying the laws of physics. Mechanism, or matter obeying the laws of physics, explains everything except conscious thought. Matter cannot explain conscious thought. And so those things that do conscious thought, minds, exist and they're non-physical. And matter exists and it's just physical, and there's not much connection between them. So then Descartes goes into this description of the circulatory system. The description of the circulatory system goes from page 26 to page 31, and I don't want to describe any of it in detail because there's no point. I do need to say a few quick things about it. I need to say that the description of the circulatory system is pretty good. I think it's not as good as what you'll get now in a science textbook for children. And you may have seen a science textbook. You probably had a science textbook for children that describes the circulatory system somewhat better than Descartes does, and hopefully with those pretty pictures where the oxygenated blood is red and the deoxygenated blood is blue and all that. But Descartes does a pretty good job describing the circulatory system, and for scientific purposes, unless you're specifically studying the history of science, maybe it's not that important. Although Thomas Kuhn thinks studying the history of science is terribly important for knowing how science actually works, but never mind Thomas Kuhn. We're not doing Kuhn today. The description of the circulatory system is philosophically important, not because it's a good description of the circulatory system, though it's fairly good for 1637, but it's really important because it's a detailed explanation of how the human body does not need a soul to make it work. Understand that the old idea of the soul is that the soul is the anima. That's the Latin word for soul. Anima, one of the Latin words for soul. The other one is mens or mentis, depending on what Latin case usage you're using. Mens means mind or soul. Anima means soul. And mens is a word you can use to describe the soul in the way Descartes is thinking of the soul, but not anima. Anima means that which gives life to the body, or that which animates the body. And an animal is called an animal because it is a thing with an anima, because it's alive. In other words, the soul is what makes the body live and do what it does. That's the old way of thinking, and Descartes saying, nope, we need to stop thinking that way. The body does what it does just because of matter obeying the laws of physics, and there's no soul making the body live and making the body function. He says, I opened up the body, not in a creepy way, but he studied circulatory systems on, I think it was cows or something. I don't remember the details. I don't really care. He studied the circulatory system, and he says it functions by the laws of mechanisms. The laws of mechanism. According to the laws of mechanics, here on page 31, according to the laws of mechanics is how the body works. He describes the circulatory system to illustrate in great detail how the body works by laws of physics alone, without the help of the soul. The body functions without the help of the soul. That's his point. The point is to illustrate his dualism. That's when he talks about the circulatory system. He compares the functioning of the body to the functioning of a clock. Very apt description for what Descartes is talking about, because it's because a clock is a mechanism. It's chunks of matter obeying the laws of physics, which is all he thinks the body is. All right, enough of this. I think we've said what needs to be said. Well, yeah, close enough. Let's just leave it at that. And we will not wrap up part 5 of the discourse in this video because there was too much to talk about. Well, I can't get the lighting right. One side of my face is too dark compared to the other side. So I still need a new plan. Maybe I adjust the angle. Well, I'll figure that out hopefully in the next video. Thanks for watching. And if you're actually watching all this, I hope you're also bothering to do some good reading in philosophy. Read Descartes. It's a good book.